Chapter 17. A journey begun in very good style, but ending not quite so well. A faithful description of a valley in Derbyshire. Mchl makes some new acquaintance. And where was little Mchl? The indentures, when duly signed and executed, did not remain 2 hours in Sir Matthew's possession before he begun to put in action the power they gave him. Mr. Joseph Parsons perfectly understood the nature of the few necessaries which he was commanded to procure for the young stocking-weaver, and, accordingly, by the time Sir Matthew had taken leave of Martha in the hall, after their walk back from Hoxley Lane, his confidential agent was ready to attend him in his study. "Now, Mr. Parsons, I flatter myself that you will allow I have managed this business tolerably well. My excellent friend, Elgood Sharpton, will owe me a good turn, for, thanks to the meddling of old Sir Robert, prentice boys are not so easily got as they used to be, and you and I, Mr. Parsons, have got rid of a most infernal spy. Now then, to business. How soon can you set off with him?" "As soon as the horse can be harnessed to the jockey cart, Sir Matthew." "The jockey cart? The devil! What a fool you are, Parsons! Have you really no more wit in you than to propose setting off willy-nilly with this young cur, that yelped at the rate that he did the other night before all the fine folk in the country, in an open jockey cart? Fie, Mr. Parsons, fie! I really had a better opinion of your understanding." "I thought he was going to set off, at any rate, by his own free will, Sir Matthew," replied the superintendent, "and I knew that when we get among the moors, it wouldn't matter much to me if he did sing out." "You are an excellent fellow, Parsons, true to the backbone, mid as firm as a rock. But don't you ever undertake to carry through such a pretty little kidnapping scheme as this, where everything is to be done according to the law, unless you've got the help of a little such stuff as this," and the knight touched his own forehead expressively as he spoke. "There's few men that wouldn't be the better for a little of that, Sir Matthew," returned the judicious Parsons with a submissive nod. "But I'm ready and willing to do your bidding, be what it may, and that's the best way of putting your honour's wit to profit." "You're right there, my good fellow. One captain is always better than two. But however, as to Master Mchl, Parsons, we must neither let him stay loitering here till his dainty mother has questioned all the gossips who will come to prate with her about her boy, and about all the nonsense current concerning Squire Elgood Sharpton's of this Thistledown House, nor yet must we carry him off at noonday in an open jockey cart without permitting him to kiss his mother and brother, and uncle and aunt, and the devil knows who beside, from one end of Ashley to the other, all ready perhaps to tell him some amusing anecdote concerning his future master." "But what be the indentures good for, Sir Matthew?" shrewdly inquired Mr. Parsons. "If they don't give you the power over the chap, let him hear what he will." "Fair and soft, Mr. Parsons. There is a when and a where in all things. It has cost me some pounds and a damned deal of trouble to get up a cry hereabouts concerning my goodness and charity to these Armstrongs. Once get the boy off, and you and I between us can make folks talk as loud as of the great preferment he has come to, as Mother Armstrong can about her doubts and alarms. There is no fear of that. I have more than one friend who will swear a thing or two for me, but once get up a screaming bout at the widow's, and a struggling scene and taking off the young gentleman, and we shall never hear the last of it. So, if you please, Mr. Parsons, we will just get the young gentleman to take a ride before he is an hour older, but not in a jockey cart, though. I believe you know the road and baiting place? By Jove, Parsons, now I think of it, there would be no better joke than taking him in my own carriage for the first few miles, and letting you drive on, as far as Wood End or thereabout, and waiting till our coming. You know I have taken him out in the carriage lots of times, so he will think nothing of that. And I will have Crockley go with me to make the party agreeable. So off with you to Wood End, as fast as you can go, but it must be in the covered cart, remember, and a trifle of cord must be in the way in case he gives trouble." Within an hour from this time, Sir Matthew Dowling's carriage was proceeding at a dignified and leisurely pace along a cross-country road which led to a lane, which led to a moor, across which was a track which led by another lane to Mr. Elgood Sharpton's factory in the desolate hollow known by the name of Deep Valley. The party, as arranged by Sir Matthew, consisted of himself, his friend Dr. Crockley, and Mchl Armstrong. The little fellow had been repeatedly honoured by a seat in the same stately vehicle before, for the purpose of being shown off at various houses in the neighbourhood, and had a notion that he was now taken out in order to hear the remainder of his great fortune announced. That this final proof of Sir Matthew's benevolence should have for its object the sending him far away from Dowling Lodge would have been, but for the dreaded parting with his mother and brother, a source of unmixed joy to the little apprentice, and, even with this drawback, the distant hopes of his young heart might have been read in the contented meditation of his eye, as he rode silently along in front of his jocose companions, who amused themselves the while in talking very mystically and concerning him and his very useful and judicious destination. At length the carriage reached the point at which Sir Matthew intended his airing should terminate, and he looked out to reconnoitre the opening of a lane to the left where he expected to see the covered cart. Nor was he disappointed. A covered cart with an excellent stout horse in it was drawn up close to the bank to take advantage of the shade of the thick elm tree that grew upon it. As the carriage approached, the occupant of the humbler vehicle peeped out, and Sir Matthew recognized the punctual Parsons. "Pull the check-string, Croxley," said the knight. "We will get out here. That is, you may if you will. There is no occasion, I suppose, for me to trouble myself, is there?" "Oh, dear no," replied Dr. Croxley cheerfully. "Here comes Parsons. Good man and true. Get out, Master Mchl. Jump, and enjoy it, my fine fellow. Perhaps you won't have much time for jumping when you begin to learn your trade." Without thinking it needful to reply to what he did not very clearly understand, Mchl did as he was bid, and sprang from the carriage to the ground. The well-known figure of Parsons greeted him as his feet touched the turf, and the next instant he felt his hand suddenly seized by him. "Shall you want me, Mr. Parsons?" said Dr. Croxley, putting his head out of the carriage. "Not at all, sir," replied the superintendent, leading Mchl forward. "Then shut the carriage door, John," said Sir Matthew, "and order the coachman to drive home." Please, sir," uttered the plaintive voice of Mchl, as he turned his head and attempted to disengage his hand. "Please, sir, is Mr. Parsons to take me away?" "Yes, my boy, he is," replied the knight, loud enough for the footman to hear. "He is going to take you to your new master, and you may give my compliments to him, my dear, and tell him that I have sent him a very good boy. Goodbye, home!" So ended the colloquy. The carriage turned round and drove off by the way it came, and Mchl Armstrong was left alone with Mr. Joseph Parsons. He need not, however, have held the little fellow's hand so tight, for there was no rebellion in his heart, nor any thoughts of escape in his head. He knew his companion too well to hope for any explanation from him respecting this sudden manner of sending him off, and child as he was, he had no inclination to weep before him. But, on the contrary, his young heart swelled with a proud determination to behave well, and to set about his new employment with a stout spirit. Nevertheless, when he arrived at the cart, he paused for a moment before he obeyed the orders of Parsons to climb up, and ventured to say, "Please, sir, bean't I to see my mother any more?" "Climb up, I tell you," said the brute, clenching his fist at him, "and if you bother me with any more questions, I'll just give you this in your mouth to stop your jabbering." Had Mchl counted 20 years instead of 10, he could not more resolutely have screwed up his spirit to endurance than he did as he now clambered up and placed himself, as he was directed, in the back part of the vehicle. Not another syllable passed his lips. For 4 hours the slow but sore-footed cart-horse jogged on through a lane that would have made any pace beyond a walk intolerable. At the end of that time the cart stopped before the door of a lonely public-house that formed a corner, round which the road turned off at nearly a right angle, and stretched across one of those wild and desolate moors which are, perhaps, only to be found in such perfection of dark and stony ruggedness in Derbyshire. Mchl, as he descended from the cart, looked out upon the unlimited expanse of dreariness and shuddered, but his mind had not been sufficiently filled with the remembrance of brighter objects to give the scene as full effect upon him as it might have produced on others. The Mucklestone Moor, haunted by the Black Dwarf, was a pleasant spot compared to it, for there the barren heath was only strewn with fragments of stones around one certain spot whence rose, doubtless, some pretence to picturesque dignity, a huge column of unhewed granite. But on the ridge-top moor of Derbyshire no object reared itself above the rest, either to attract or relieve the eye. As far as sight could reach, the wild heath was encumbered with a crowded layer of large and shapeless grey stones, defying the air of heaven to nourish vegetation among them, and making any effort of man to remove the congregated mass desperate and unavailing. Arid, rugged, desolate was the desert that spread around, and to those who knew the nature of the operations carried on in every direction near it, no great stretch of imagination would have been necessary to suggest the idea of fitness and sympathy between the district and the most influential portion of its population. This is, indeed, a fitness that seems often found. Where towering mountains scale the heavens, the hardy natives show a spirit pure and clear as the sweet air by which they live. In the rich valleys of the east, the lazy peasant eats his rice, purchased with easy labor, and is content to dream away his being in the sultry shade. And in the flinty region of our northern moors, the race of millocrats batten and grow fat, as if they were conscious of and rejoiced in the local sympathy. A stunted elderly lad of all work came forth on hearing the rumblings of the wheels. "Ask the dame if she has got 2 beds in one room," said Mr. Parsons, descending from the driving seat, of which he had quite as much as he desired. The message brought out a hideous crone, whose sharp visage looked as if it had drawn itself up into points and angles while battling with the rough blast that roared, whistled, and moaned about her dwelling. "And who be you?" was her first salutation, to which Mr. Parsons only nodded graciously in reply. "Dear me, be it you, sir?" exclaimed the woman. "I ax your pardon for not knowing your honour at a glance. Beds? Aye, plenty of beds, sir. Please to walk in. Who is this fine young'un? He can't have nothing to do with the mills, anyway." "This is a fine holiday suite, damme, that Sir Matthew has been pleased to bestow upon him," replied Mr. Parsons, "and if he had behaved himself a little better, might he have lived like a prince to the end of his days. But he is an untoward chap, and chose to cry when he should have laughed. And so, you see, the fine folk at the lodge got tired of him." "What then? This be the boy, be it, as we have had so many talking about? He was to be made a gentleman of by Sir Matthew Dowling, and so he's turned off, is he?" This was said as the old woman led the way to the receiving room, that is to say, the kitchen of the mansion, and here, though the season was still warm elsewhere, a large fire was burning. That its warmth was welcome might be gathered from the fact that the only persons in possession of the room were sitting or standing close beside it. The guests, before the arrival of the newcomers, amounted only to 3, namely a young woman pacing her way to a distant service, a stout lad, her brother, who travelled with her, to carry her box and guard her from harm, and a venerable-looking man with grey hair, but having withal bright eyes and a florid skin, and bearing in his dress and demeanour the appearance of a thriving agriculturalist. It was with so bustling a movement that the landlady pushed back the little round table on which stood the farmer's mug of beer, and there was so much respect in the manner with which she wiped the chair and brought forward for Mr. Parsons, that the fact of his being a person of consequence became notorious to all. The farmer quietly pushed back his chair to follow the table. The young woman modestly squeezed herself very closely into the chimney corner, and her brother fairly bolted, standing with his eyes and mouth widely open, to gaze at ease upon the distinguished society into which it had been his chance to fall. Mr. Parsons took his place among them, as such a great man ought to do. That is to say, he looked neither to his right nor to the left, but made himself comfortable without taking the trouble of considering whether any other person were present or not. Mchl crept in after him, and, when the more important part of the company had arranged themselves, he was observed standing alone in the most distant part of the room. "What dost stand shivering there for, my boy?" said the old farmer, in northern country dialect, so broad as to be dangerous for south folks to spell. "I could be thinking after that there was some mistake here. Surely you ought not to be standing while some other folks are sitting." This observation, though the genuine result of the old man's notions of the vulgar and the reverse, might not have been so bluntly spoken, had he not felt himself affronted by the unceremonious style in which his place before the fire had been taken from him. Mchl probably did not understand the full meaning of the remark. Nevertheless, he looked dreadfully terrified, and fixed his eyes upon the back of Mr. Parsons' august head, his face being fortunately turned from him, with an expression of desperate fear that seemed to puzzle the good farmer. Well now, don't he look like a well-behaved and pretty young gentleman, as one would wish to see?" continued the farmer, turning to the young girl. "And yet there's no mistaking that 'tis the other's his master.